The ceiling in this ward was painted the same dull white as the hallway, and the stain from the leak in the corner reminded me of a map of some unknown continent. I had been lying on my back for 2 days, counting the cracks in the plaster and listening to the sounds of hospital life outside the door. Carts clattered across the linoleum, nurses discussed someone's test results, and somewhere a child was crying. And I thought about how strange life is. 72 years ago, I was born in a similar ward, and now I was back here again, only now at the other end of the journey. The fall happened stupidly. I went down to the basement to get some jars of jam that I had made in the summer, but the step was wet with condensation and my foot slipped. I woke up on the floor with pain in my hip and the realization that I couldn't get up on my own. It was good that Carol was home. She heard the crash and came downstairs. She saw me on the concrete floor and immediately called an ambulance. The doctors said there were no fractures, just a severe bruise, but at my age it was better to stay under observation. Carol agreed very quickly. Too quickly, to be honest. My daughter had been living with me for 3 years. She came back after her divorce from Thomas, bringing 2 suitcases and a tear-stained face. She said it was temporary until she found a job and got back on her feet. I didn't mind. The house is big, there's plenty of room, and it was a bit boring after Frank died. My husband died 5 years ago of a heart attack, quickly, before the ambulance even arrived. Since then, I've gotten used to the silence, but my daughter's presence still livens up the house. True, Carol turned out to be not the easiest roommate. At 48, she still hadn't learned to clean up after herself, always left the TV on, and could talk on the phone for hours, discussing all her acquaintances with her friends. She looked for work half-heartedly, mostly browsing ads on the internet, but rarely went to interviews. She said that at her age it was difficult to find something suitable, that employers preferred younger people. Maybe so, but it seemed to me that she just wasn't trying very hard. I remember how she tried to get a job at the local library. They needed a librarian's assistant. The work was not difficult, but Carol came back from the interview upset. She said they offered her evening and weekend shifts, which didn't work for her. Then there was an attempt at a flower shop. That didn't work out either. Either the schedule didn't suit her, or the pay was too low, or the team wasn't a good fit. In 3 years, she only worked a few months at a supermarket, but she left there too after a falling out with the manager. I tried not to interfere in her affairs, but sometimes my irritation got the better of me, especially when she ran out of money and Carol started hinting that it would be nice if I helped her with groceries or paid for her car. I had a small pension and some savings that Frank had left me, but spending them on an adult daughter who simply didn't want to work seemed wrong. 6 months ago, Carol met Richard. He is a pleasant, polite man who works for an insurance company. He is 53, divorced, and has no children. They are in a serious relationship, and Carol has even mentioned marriage. Richard came to our house quite often, and we got along well, although I felt that my presence made him a little uncomfortable. He was one of those people who are used to their space and don't really like to share it. One evening, when they were sitting in the kitchen and thought I couldn't hear them, Richard said something to Carol about needing more privacy, that a serious relationship requires separate living arrangements. Carol replied that she understood him, but the situation was complicated. She said her mother was elderly and it was difficult for her to be alone. Richard said nothing, but I felt that the conversation was not over. In recent weeks, Carol had become somewhat nervous. She said something about it being time for her and Richard to move in together, that their relationship had reached an impasse. I didn't interfere, but I understood that sooner or later the question of my continued residence in the house would arise. It was my house, but Carol didn't seem to remember that. Or she pretended not to remember. She started talking about my health a lot. She said my hearing was getting worse, which wasn't true. I could hear perfectly well. She said I forgot to turn off the stove, which was also not true. That had never happened in my entire life. She suggested I go to the doctor to have my blood pressure checked and get some tests done. When I refused, she took offense and said she was worried about my safety. She also began to mention nursing homes frequently. She told me how her friend Cindy had placed her mother there and that she really liked it. She said there was medical staff, organized meals, and leisure activities, that I would be looked after there and wouldn't have to worry about the house or the household, that this was a modern approach to caring for the elderly. I listened and said nothing. I understood what she was getting at, but I didn't want to cause a scene. After all, Carol has a right to her own life, but I also have the right to live in my own house for as long as I want. I inherited this house from my parents. I grew up here, got married here, and had my daughter here. Every board, every nail here is steeped in my life, and no one will force me to move to some old people's home. It was getting dark outside. The hallway grew quieter. Apparently, the evening procedures were over. I turned on my side and tried to get comfortable. The hospital bed was narrow and hard, the pillow flat. At home at this time, I would already be brewing myself some chamomile tea and turning on the news. I loved watching the local reports, finding out what was happening in San Jose, who had been elected to the city council, where the roads were being repaired. My roommate, an elderly Mexican woman, was quietly talking on the phone with one of her relatives. She was speaking Spanish, but from her tone of voice, I could tell she was reassuring someone, saying that everything was fine and that she would be discharged soon. She had had many visitors over the past 2 days: children, grandchildren, some distant relatives. They brought her home-cooked meals and flowers, sat around her bed, and chatted. I was a little envious, not because I lacked attention, but because they had a natural closeness that Carol and I never had. Perhaps I wasn't the warmest mother. Frank always said I was too strict, too demanding. Maybe so. I grew up in a family where children were not spoiled, where responsibility and independence were demanded. My parents lived through the Great Depression and knew the value of money and hard work. They taught me these principles, and I tried to teach them to Carol. The door opened and a nurse entered the room. She was young, about 25, with neatly styled hair and a tired face. Her name tag said, Jennifer. She had given me an injection yesterday and had worked professionally and quickly. Mrs. Stone, it's time for your injection, she said, approaching my bed with a small tray. What is it? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Pain medication. Dr. Miller has prescribed a 3-day course. How are you feeling? Better. The pain is almost gone. Great. Then tomorrow morning the doctor will examine you again, and if everything is fine, you will be discharged. I rolled up my pajama sleeve and held out my arm. The needle went in quickly and almost painlessly. Jennifer was an experienced nurse, you could tell right away. She worked efficiently, without unnecessary movements, and yet managed to be friendly. Will someone be picking you up tomorrow? She asked, putting away the syringe. My daughter is coming. Good. Try to get some sleep. Sleep is the best medicine. Jennifer left, and I was alone with my thoughts again. The injection really helped. The pain subsided, and I felt pleasantly relaxed. Maybe I'll be able to sleep normally. I slept poorly last night, waking up all the time from the noise in the hallway. I thought about tomorrow. Carol promised to come in the morning and pick me up. Then at home there would be the usual conversations about how I need to be more careful, that falls are dangerous at my age. She would pretend to be concerned, and I would agree, even though I knew perfectly well that what had happened was just an unfortunate coincidence. I had gone down to the basement hundreds of times and never fallen. But something in my daughter's behavior over the last few days had made me wary. She talked too often about how tired I was, how hard it was for me to manage the house. She insisted too strongly that I consider a nursing home. And there was that strange gleam in her eyes when she talked about her future with Richard. It was as if she had already made up her mind, but hadn't told me yet. Maybe I was wrong to suspect my own daughter of something bad. Maybe she was really just worried about my health, but a mother's heart feels more than her mind can express, and my heart sank with anxiety every time Carol brought up my age and infirmities. The room was getting cold. I pulled the blanket up higher and closed my eyes. Sleep came slowly but inevitably. The medicine was working, my thoughts becoming sluggish and unclear. My last thought was one of surprise. Why Carol hadn't called once today to see how I was feeling. She usually called every evening when she stayed late at Richard's. The hospital was always noisy in the morning. Nurses hurriedly delivered breakfast, doctors made their rounds, and the voices of visitors could be heard in the hallway. I woke up early, around 7 in the morning, when it was just beginning to get light outside. I slept well, the painkillers helped, although I woke up several times because my roommate was coughing. Jennifer brought breakfast: oatmeal, toast, tea, and some kind of jelly with an unfamiliar taste. Hospital food has never been known for its sophistication, but I ate everything. At my age, it's important to stay strong. Jennifer said that Dr. Miller would come for his rounds around 10, and in the meantime, I should be patient and rest. I couldn't stand idleness. At home by this time, I would have already made breakfast, watered the flowers, checked my email, and planned my day. Here, all I could do was lie there and stare at the ceiling or watch what was happening outside the window. Old oak trees grew in the hospital courtyard, and I watched the wind sway their branches. It was the height of autumn. The leaves had turned yellow and were gradually falling. Around 11 in the morning, the door of the ward opened and Carol appeared on the threshold. She was wearing her best suit, a dark blue jacket and skirt that she had bought last year for job interviews. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup flawless. Richard followed her in, holding a small bouquet of chrysanthemums and a box of chocolates. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Carol asked, approaching my bed. She leaned down to kiss me on the cheek, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, a sweet floral scent she only wore on special occasions. It was strange to see her so dressed up in the morning. At home, she usually wore old jeans and stretched out sweaters. "Fine," I replied, looking at them both. "The pain is almost gone. The doctor said he'll discharge me today." "That's wonderful," said Richard, placing the flowers on the nightstand. We were very worried. He looked a little tense, which was unusual for him. Richard was usually calm and confident, but today there was a certain stiffness in his movements. He avoided direct eye contact and kept adjusting his tie, a habit I had noticed when he was nervous. "Richard insisted that we come early," Carol said, settling into a chair next to the bed. "He wanted to make sure you were okay. Of course, Mrs. Stone is very important to me," Richard added, but the words sounded forced, as if he had rehearsed them beforehand. I studied his face. Richard Walters was an attractive man for his age, tall, fit, with graying temples and intelligent brown eyes. He dressed well, took care of himself, and spoke intelligently and interestingly. An insurance agent by profession, he had worked for a large company for over 20 years. He had his own apartment in a good neighborhood, a reliable car, and a stable income. In short, he was an enviable suitor for a divorced woman in her 50s. But today, something about him was off. He glanced at Carol too often, as if waiting for some kind of signal from her. She, in turn, was also acting strangely, talking too loudly, laughing too loudly, fiddling with her bag strap the whole time. "How are you doing?" I asked, deciding to test the waters. "Richard, how's work?" "Everything's fine," he replied. "It's the busy season right now, with many people renewing their insurance for next year. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it." "Are you still dating?" I continued, looking at them in turn. Carol blushed and glanced quickly at Richard. He coughed and adjusted his tie again. "Yes, of course, Mom. We talked to you about it." We did. I'm just wondering how things are going. A serious relationship is a big responsibility. We understand that, Richard said, and we do have serious plans. His voice took on a metallic tone, and I realized that the conversation was taking the turn I had feared. Carol looked at her fiancé again, and there was something pleading in her gaze. What plans? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We want to get married, Carol said quickly, as if afraid she would change her mind. In the spring, maybe April or May. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony. Congratulations, I said dryly. Where do you plan to live? There it was. The main question hung in the air between us. Carol pressed her lips together. Richard reached for his tie again. We all sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the hospital outside the door. Mom, we need to talk about this, Carol finally said. Richard lives in an apartment. It's not very big. And your house? It's too big for one person. For one person? I repeated. I'm not alone. I live with my daughter. But Mom, think about it. We need our own space. Newlyweds need privacy. Newlyweds. At 48 and 53. I almost laughed, but I held back. It wasn't the time for sarcasm. The house is big, I said calmly. 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms. There's enough room for everyone. Richard shuddered and exchanged glances with Carol. It was clear that he was categorically opposed to this option. He was the kind of person who was used to being the master of his own house, making all the decisions himself. The presence of an elderly mother-in-law was clearly not part of his plans for family life. Mom, you have to understand, Carol continued, a pleading note in her voice. I'm 48. This may be my last chance at happiness. Richard is a wonderful man. He's willing to marry me, but, she didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. But he's not willing to live with your mother. Mrs. Stone, Richard interjected, his voice softening. I respect you very much, and this has nothing to do with personal feelings. I just believe that each generation should live separately. It's a modern approach to family life. A modern approach, I repeated. I see. Mom, we don't want to kick you out, Carol quickly added. We've been thinking about other options. There's a wonderful nursing home 10 miles from here called Sunny Hills. It has very good facilities, medical staff, and organized meals. You would be under constant supervision and wouldn't have to worry about housework. And you've already looked into everything? We were just looking at options, Richard said uncertainly. Just in case. Just in case, I echoed. My roommate was talking on the phone in Spanish, and her soft voice created a strange contrast to the tension of our conversation. I looked at my daughter and her fiancé and thought about how quickly life can change. Just 3 days ago, I was living peacefully in my home, watering my flowers and planning what to plant in the garden in the spring. And now I'm sitting in a hospital room, listening to them explain that my place is in a nursing home. What if I don't agree? I asked. Carol and Richard exchanged glances again. This time there was something in their eyes that I didn't like. Something too understanding, too premeditated. Mom, you have to be reasonable, Carol said, her voice firm. Look what happened. You fell in the basement and could have been seriously injured. What if I hadn't been home? You would have been lying there until morning. But you were home. I was then. What about when I get married? Who will look after you? I was perfectly capable of looking after myself before you moved in with me. 3 years ago you were younger, Carol countered, and you were in better health. You yourself said that it was harder to climb the stairs, that you got tired more quickly. I didn't remember saying anything like that. Maybe I complained about knee pain or poor sleep. But Carol made it sound as if I already had one foot in the grave. Mom, we can't constantly worry about your safety, she continued. It's not fair to us. Not fair, I repeated slowly. Yes, we have a right to happiness too. I sacrificed my personal life for 3 years for you. Now it's time to think about myself. Richard nodded in agreement. He looked more confident now that Carol had taken the initiative. Apparently, they had rehearsed this conversation many times, and now everyone knew their role. Sunny Hills is a really nice place, he said. There's a library, a craft room, and they organize excursions. You'll have an active social life. An active social life? I repeated. What about the house? What about the house? Carol asked. What will happen to my house? Another pause, more meaningful glances. Mom, the house is big. It's hard to maintain, Carol began cautiously. Taxes, utilities, repairs. All of that costs money, and your pension isn't that big. I have savings, which won't last long if you spend it on the house and the nursing home at the same time. I was beginning to understand where she was going with this. Sell the house and use the money to pay for the nursing home, and whatever is left after I die will go to Carol. A very convenient plan. Mom, we're not rushing you to make a decision, Carol said more gently. Think about it calmly. Weigh the pros and cons. But remember, we can't put our lives on hold forever. How much time do I have? To think about it? Carol looked at Richard. Well, let's say a month. A decision must be made by the end of November. A month. Until the end of November. How generous. Okay, I said calmly. I'll think about it. Carol relaxed, as if the most difficult part of the conversation was over. Richard also looked relieved. They had apparently expected a scandal, tears, reproaches, but I had long since learned to control my emotions. This skill has served me well in life. Thank you, Mom, Carol said, leaning over again to kiss me. You've always been a reasonable person, a sensible person. I wonder what she meant by sensible. Agreeing to all her demands? Soon after that, they left. They said Richard had an important meeting and that they would come back in the evening to pick me up. I was left alone with my thoughts and the realization that the life I knew was coming to an end. In the evening, Carol returned alone. She said that Richard had gone to the office. He had to close some urgent deal with a client. She brought my things in a small sports bag and looked tired. Her makeup was slightly smudged, her hair was tousled, and her eyes showed a feverish fatigue. Did the doctor talk to you? She asked, settling into the same chair she had sat in that morning. Yes, he said everything is fine and will discharge me tomorrow morning. She just needs one more shot tonight, and that's it. Great, so you'll be home by lunchtime tomorrow. She spoke distractedly, checking her phone constantly, as if waiting for an important message. Her fingers drummed nervously on her bag, and her gaze wandered around the room, not lingering on anything in particular. Carol, you're acting strange, I said bluntly. What's going on? Nothing's going on, she replied too quickly. I'm just tired. Today was a hard day. Because of our conversation? Not only that, basically, I'm glad we discussed everything. At least now there's clarity. Clarity. An interesting word. For me, there was no clarity. It was unclear why they were in such a hurry, why they couldn't wait another year or two until I made my own decision about the nursing home. At 72, I'm still quite capable. I can cook, clean, and tend to the garden. Of course, I have less energy than I did at 50, but I'm still far from being completely helpless. Tell me about the wedding, I asked, deciding to change the subject. Where are you planning to hold the ceremony? Carol's face lit up, and she put the phone down. At St. Patrick's Church on Santa Clara Street. Remember, that's where Thomas and I got married? I like it there. It's a small, cozy church, not too fancy. And then a small reception at a restaurant. 30 or 40 people, no more. Richard wants to invite his colleagues, and I want to invite a few friends. You'll be there too, of course. If I'm still in San Jose by then. Carol grimaced as if I had said something unpleasant. Mom, why are you acting like this? Sunny Hills is only 10 miles away. Of course you'll be at the wedding. We'll come pick you up. I see. Where will you spend your honeymoon? Richard wants to go to Europe, Italy maybe, or France. He's never been there, and I only went to Paris with you and Dad when I was young. Do you remember that trip? Of course I remembered. Carol was 16 at the time. She was moody, didn't want to go to museums, complained about French food. Frank said then that he would never take her on a trip again. And he didn't. I remember. How long will you be gone? 2 weeks, probably, maybe 3. Richard says he has accumulated several years' worth of vacation time. That's a long time. Mom, it's a honeymoon. It's a time for newlyweds to spend together. We need to get to know each other better. Haven't you gotten to know each other in 6 months of dating? Carol grimaced again. Apparently, I was asking the wrong questions. Mom, dating and living together are two different things. We each have our own habits, our own rhythm of life. It takes time to get used to each other. What if you don't? We will. We're adults. We know how to compromise. Your first marriage started with compromises too. Mom! Carol raised her voice, then quickly glanced at her neighbor and lowered it. Why are you saying that? Richard is nothing like Thomas. What's the difference? Everything. Thomas was irresponsible, constantly changing jobs, spending money on nonsense. Richard is reliable, has a stable job, and plans for the future, and demands that you send your mother to a nursing home. He doesn't demand anything, Carol exclaimed, her voice taking on a hysterical tone. It's a mutual decision. We both think it will be better for everyone. For everyone or for the two of you? Carol stood up abruptly and walked over to the window. She stood there for a minute, looking out at the hospital courtyard, then came back and sat down. Mom, why can't you just support me? She asked, her voice tinged with hurt. You've criticized my decisions my whole life. When I married Thomas, you said he wasn't right for me. When I filed for divorce, you said I should try to save the family. When I moved in with you, you kept hinting that it was time for me to find a job. Now I've met a good man who is willing to marry me, and you're finding fault again. I'm not finding fault. I'm just trying to understand why it's so important to you that I move into a nursing home immediately. Because it's sensible, Carol exploded. Because at your age, it's dangerous to live alone in a big house. Because sooner or later you're going to need medical care, and it's better if you're where you can get it. And also because Richard doesn't want to live with his elderly mother-in-law. Carol fell silent. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the hospital. Someone was talking loudly on the phone in the hallway. A door slammed somewhere, and the footsteps of the medical staff could be heard. Okay, Carol finally said. Yes, Richard would prefer that we live separately from you. What's wrong with that? He has a right to want privacy in his own marriage. In his own marriage in my house. In our house. After the wedding, it will be our shared home. No, Carol, it will be my house that you live in. There is a difference. What difference? We'll still be one family. A family with no place for an elderly mother. Mom, why do you have to turn everything upside down? We just think you'll be better off in a special facility where you'll be cared for by professionals who don't even know my name. But they know how to help if you have a stroke or a heart attack, and I don't. And that's why it's easier for you to hand me over to strangers. Not strangers, medical professionals. Carol, be honest. If Richard agreed to live with me in the same house, would you still insist on a nursing home? A long pause. Carol stared at the floor, fiddling with the strap of her bag. When she looked up, there was something in her eyes that I didn't expect to see, something hard and determined. Yes, she said quietly. I would still insist. Why? Because I'm tired, Mom. Tired of being your daughter. Tired of constantly reporting where I'm going and when I'll be back. Tired of listening to your comments about my clothes, my friends, my plans. Tired of feeling like a failure who lives with her mother at 48. I never called you a failure. Not with words, but your gaze, your tone of voice said enough. Remember how you reacted to the news of my divorce? You said, I knew it wouldn't work out. You didn't support me or sympathize with me. You just stated that you were right, because I saw that Thomas wasn't right for you. And Richard is? I don't know. Time will tell. Time. Carol laughed bitterly. Mom, I'm 48 years old. I don't have time for experiments. Richard is my last chance to have a normal family, to have a life partner, to not end up a lonely old woman. And for that chance, you're willing to send your mother to a nursing home. Yes, I am, and I don't see what's so terrible about that. Millions of people live in nursing homes and feel great because their children couldn't take care of them, not because they were getting in the way of a new marriage. Mom, you're being unfair. I took care of you for 3 years, 3 years of my life. Isn't that enough? 3 years, as if it were a sacrifice she made out of pure altruism, as if I had forced her to live in my house. No one forced you to move in with me, I said calmly. What else could I do? After the divorce, I had no money, no job, no place to live. You had friends. Friends are temporary. You're my mother. I thought you would help me get back on my feet. And I did. I gave you a roof over your head, didn't charge you rent, fed you, and constantly reminded me of it. I never reminded you. Not with words, but I could feel it. Your silence when I ran out of money for groceries. Your look when I couldn't find a job. Your patience when I was seeing Richard and came home late. I was patient because you're my daughter. But I want to be more than just a daughter. I want to be a woman, a wife, just a person living her own life. And for that, I need to disappear from your life. Not disappear, just live separately. Carol stood up again and walked to the window. Twilight was gathering outside, and the night lights in the hospital courtyard were coming on. I looked at my daughter's back and thought about how little I knew her. 48 years ago, I held her in my arms, fed her from a bottle, taught her to walk and talk. And now there was a stranger standing in front of me who wanted to get rid of me at any cost. Mom, Carol said without turning around, I don't want us to fight. I really want you to be happy. But I have a right to happiness too. Of course you do. Then why can't you understand? Why can't you just agree? Because this is my home, Carol, the home I've lived in my whole life, and I'm not willing to leave it for your convenience. Carol turned to me, and I saw an expression in her eyes that I didn't like, something cold and calculating. What if it's not for convenience? She asked quietly. What do you mean? What if it's for safety, for your own safety? Carol, what are you talking about? She paused, as if weighing her words. Then she came back and sat down next to my bed. Mom, you're getting older. It's natural. It happens to everyone. But with age come problems. Forgetfulness, instability, health problems. Sooner or later, you'll need constant care. When that time comes, we'll decide then. What if it's already here? What if you just don't notice? What don't I notice? Mom, you forgot to turn off the gas last week. I came home and the burner was on with an empty pot on it. I didn't remember that happening, but Carol was very convincing, even with a hint of sadness in her voice. I don't remember that. See, you don't remember, and you left the door to the garden open when you went to the store. Anyone could have entered the house. I didn't remember that either. But maybe I really did forget. Lately, I've been feeling distracted at times, especially when I'm tired. Mom, I'm not making this up. These things really happened, and they'll happen more and more often until something serious happens. Serious? A fire, or you'll forget to lock the house and leave. And when you come back, you'll find that you've been burglarized. Or you'll fall down the stairs when I'm not home, like 2 days ago, when I fell in the basement. Was that a sign? Mom, Carol said gently, I don't want anything to happen to you. That's why I'm suggesting a nursing home. You'll be safe there. The door to the room opened and Jennifer came in with a tray. Time for your injection, Mrs. Stone, she said cheerfully. Carol went to the window and I held out my arm to the nurse. The needle went in quickly, as always. You'll be discharged tomorrow morning, Jennifer said. Get ready to go home. Home. If I still have a home by the time Carol finishes talking to me. After Jennifer left, Carol sat with me for another 15 minutes, but the conversation was awkward. She kept getting distracted by her phone, responding to messages, while I felt the painkillers taking effect. My thoughts became sluggish, my eyelids heavy. Maybe they had increased the dosage or changed the medication, but I felt more sleepy than yesterday. Mom, you're tired, Carol said, noticing that I was fighting sleep. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll have to get ready to go home. Are you staying? I asked sleepily. No, I have to go to Richard's. We agreed to meet to discuss the details of the wedding. Sleep well. She kissed me on the forehead and left, and I closed my eyes. It usually took me a while to fall asleep in a strange place, but today sleep came quickly and inevitably. My last thought was one of surprise. Had talking to my daughter really worn me out that much? I woke up to the sound of voices in the hallway. At first, I thought it was morning, but it was still dark outside. The glowing clock on the wall showed that it was 11 o'clock at night. I had slept for about 2 hours, but I felt strange, rested and sluggish at the same time. My head was clear, but my body felt like cotton wool, my movements slow. My roommate was sleeping, snoring quietly. Someone was talking in hushed voices in the hallway, and one of them sounded familiar. I listened and realized it was Carol. She had come back, even though she had said she was going to Richard's for the whole evening. I understand your concerns, doctor, but the situation is critical, she said. Mrs. Harrison, increasing the dosage at her age can be dangerous, replied a male voice. I recognize Dr. Miller. The medication is already quite strong. But she's in pain, Carol insisted. She moans all night and can't sleep. Is it humane to let an old person suffer? Strange. I didn't remember anyone moaning, and I didn't feel any severe pain. My hip hardly bothered me, and I fell asleep easily. Your mother seemed perfectly normal when I examined her this morning. Doctor, she's hiding it. She doesn't want to complain. She's proud. But I can see how hard it is for her. And the nurse said the same thing, that she's restless, tossing and turning all the time. The nurse said that? Jennifer? But she never complained about my behavior. Jennifer didn't report anything to me about your mother's restlessness. Maybe she forgot to mention it. You have so much to do here. You can't remember all the patients. My heart began to beat faster. Something about Carol's tone was wrong. She was too insistent in asking for an increase in dosage, too convincing in her concern. Mrs. Harrison, I understand your concern for your mother, but I can't increase the dosage without medical indications. The drug is already quite powerful for a patient her age. What could be the consequences if we increase the dosage? Various. Respiratory depression, cardiac arrhythmia, and in extreme cases, coma. Coma, Carol repeated, and there was something strange in her voice. Not fear, as there should have been, but some kind of interest. That's why we're so careful with dosages for elderly patients. But if the patient is in a lot of pain, Mrs. Harrison, your mother is being discharged tomorrow. At home, you can give her regular over-the-counter painkillers as needed. I understand, but maybe we should keep her in for another day, for observation, and increase the dosage tonight so she can sleep well before she's discharged. My breath caught in my throat. I understood where the conversation was going, and a chill of horror ran down my spine. My own daughter was trying to convince the doctor to increase the dosage of the medication so that I wouldn't wake up. No, Mrs. Harrison, there is no medical indication for that. Your mother will receive the standard dosage as prescribed, and we will discharge her in the morning. Doctor, you don't understand. She is in a lot of pain. Maybe you could increase the dose just a little, by 10%? No, I'm sorry, but that is my final decision. I heard footsteps. Dr. Miller was leaving. Carol remained in the hallway, and I could hear her breathing. Heavy, disappointed breathing. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. It was a good thing I hadn't forgotten to charge it at home. I found the voice recorder function. I used to use it to record recipes that were dictated on TV. I turned on the recording and placed the phone next to my pillow, covering it with the edge of the blanket. A few minutes later, Carol entered the room. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe evenly, pretending to be asleep. She came over to my bed and stood there for a moment, studying my face. Then she called softly, "Mom?" I didn't answer, continuing to pretend to be asleep. Carol stood there for a little longer, then went back out into the hallway. I heard her dial a number. "Richard, it's me. No, things aren't going well. The doctor refused to increase the dosage. He says there are no medical indications." Pause. Richard said something, but I couldn't hear him. Yes, I tried to convince him. I talked about the pain, about the anxiety. He didn't believe me. Dr. Miller is too experienced. Another pause. I don't know. She's being discharged tomorrow. It will be more difficult at home. There is no medical staff there who might not notice. Notice what? I strained my ears, but Carol walked further down the corridor, and her words became indistinguishable. A few minutes later, she returned, entered the ward again, and sat down on a chair next to my bed. "Mom," she called softly. I continued to pretend to be asleep. My heart was beating so loudly that I thought she must be able to hear it. "Mom, if you're awake, I need to tell you something." I lay still. Carol paused, then sighed. "You must be asleep. The medicine is strong. It should help." She got up and went back out into the hallway. I cautiously opened one eye. The room was empty. I picked up my phone and checked. The recording had been going on for 15 minutes. It was good that it had a large memory. Carol returned in about 10 minutes. This time, she didn't sit down, but went straight to the door and called someone. "Jennifer, can I have a minute?" A nurse entered the room. She looked tired. The night shift had apparently been difficult. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Harrison?" "I'm worried about my mother. She's sleeping very restlessly and moaning. Maybe she needs extra pain medication." "Let's take a look," said Jennifer, coming over to me. I lay still, trying to breathe evenly. Jennifer checked my pulse and felt my forehead. "Your pulse is normal, no fever." She looks calm. "Are you sure she was moaning?" "Yes, several times." "Maybe you didn't notice?" "Mrs. Harrison, I make regular rounds. Your mother was sleeping very peacefully. No signs of restlessness or pain. But maybe we should give her something extra to help her sleep better?" She has no prescription for additional medication, and Dr. Miller gave no instructions to change the dosage. "I understand, but—" "Mrs. Harrison," Jennifer interrupted, her voice firm. "Your mother is receiving the exact dosage that is right for her. She doesn't need anything more." "Okay," Carol said after a pause. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm just worried." "I understand, but trust me, your mother is fine. Tomorrow morning she'll be as good as new. Jennifer left, and Carol stayed. She sat back down in her chair and took out her phone. She dialed a number and began to speak very quietly, almost in a whisper. Richard? Yes, it's me again. The nurse refused, too. She says everything is fine. No additional medication is needed. Pause. I don't know what to do. She'll be discharged tomorrow, and then everything will be much more difficult. Pause. Yes, I understand. We need to act quickly. Maybe there are other ways? Pause. At home? But how? We don't have access to strong medications. Pause. Oh, yes, you have friends at the pharmacy. Okay, let's try that, but it has to look natural. Pause. An accident, yes. At her age, anything can happen. I found it difficult to breathe. They planned my death, discussing the details as if they were shopping for groceries. My own daughter and her fiancé were coldly deciding how best to kill me. Okay, Carol continued. I'm picking her up from the hospital tomorrow. Everything should be over by evening. Increase the dosage. She needs to sleep for a long time. Those exact words, the very ones that were in the topic I was given. It was as if someone knew it was going to happen and warned me. Carol ended the conversation and sat next to me for a while longer. Then she stood up, leaned over, and kissed me on the forehead. Good night, Mom, she whispered. Tomorrow it will all be over. After she left, I lay motionless for a long time, afraid to move. The phone continued to record, capturing every sound in the ward. I thought about what I had heard and couldn't believe what was happening. My daughter, whom I had given birth to, nursed, raised, wanted to kill me. Not just send me to a nursing home, kill me, to get rid of me for good and inherit the house. My roommate sniffed quietly in her sleep. Somewhere in the hallway, a nurse was talking to an orderly about work issues. The usual nighttime sounds of a hospital, nothing special. And I lay there and realized that tomorrow could be my last day if I didn't do something. But what could I do? Who could I turn to? I had a recording of the conversation, but who would believe me? Who would believe that an adult daughter was planning to kill her own mother for the sake of a house and a man? My hand was shaking when I turned off the recording. The phone showed that the file had been saved. At least I had proof. All that remained was to figure out what to do with it. It was starting to get light outside. Soon the nurses would come with their morning procedures, then breakfast, then the doctor with my discharge papers, and then Carol would take me home, where death, disguised as an accident, would be waiting for me. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. 72 years old is not a death sentence. I still have the strength and mind to defend myself, and I know what to do. I hardly slept until morning. I lay in the dark and thought about what I had heard. My thoughts raced from disbelief to horror, from horror to attempts to find a rational explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood something. Maybe the conversation was about something else. But no, the words were too clear, the meaning too obvious. Carol wanted me to die. When did she start wanting that? A year ago? 6 months? Or had it been brewing for years and I just hadn't noticed? I thought back over the last few months, looking for signs I might have missed. Strange looks when she thought I wasn't watching. Overly insistent conversations about my age and health. Frequent mentions of nursing homes. Irritation when I refused to go to the doctor for any reason. And even earlier, how she reacted to my illness. 3 years ago, I had pneumonia and was lying at home with a high fever. Carol took care of me, but somewhat reluctantly, as if she were performing an unpleasant duty. When the doctor said that the crisis had passed, she didn't look relieved, more disappointed. At the time, I chalked it up to fatigue. Caring for a sick person is hard, especially when you are going through a divorce and depression yourself. But now I remembered the look on her face when the doctor said I needed bed rest and peace. Something flashed in her eyes that I couldn't understand at the time. Now I understood. It was hope. Hope that the illness would do what she herself did not dare to do. Outside the window, it was getting light. A new day was beginning in the hospital. The nurses were getting ready for the morning shift, and the first voices could be heard in the corridor. And I lay there thinking about my daughter, trying to understand when and where I had gone wrong in raising her. Carol was born when I was 24. Frank was just starting his career at the bank. Money was tight, and we lived in a small rented apartment. I worked as a secretary at a law firm, but after giving birth, I had to quit my job. Daycare was too expensive a luxury. The first few years were difficult. Frank worked a lot and came home late and tired. The main responsibility for caring for the child fell on me. Carol was a capricious child. She slept poorly, cried a lot, and refused to eat what I cooked. At 18 months, she started having tantrums. She could scream for hours over the slightest thing. The pediatrician said it was normal and would pass, but it was hard for me, especially when Frank was late at work and I was left alone with the child. I remember once when Carol was about 3. She threw a tantrum because I didn't give her candy before dinner. She screamed, stamped her feet, and threw her toys. And I sat in the kitchen and thought about how quiet and peaceful it would be if she weren't there. Then I felt ashamed of that thought, but it came back again and again in difficult moments. Carol must have sensed my irritation. Children sense more than adults realize. Perhaps it was then, in early childhood, that the gap between us began to widen, only to deepen over the years. Carol did well in school, but without much enthusiasm. Teachers complained about her laziness and inattention. She only did her homework under my supervision. Otherwise, she would find 1,000 excuses. I made her study, checked every exercise, and demanded that she rewrite her work if it was sloppy. "You're too strict," Frank would say to me. "Give the child some freedom." But I remembered my childhood during the Great Depression. I remembered how my parents saved on everything, how they valued education and discipline. In their view, only hard work could ensure a decent life. They taught me these principles, and I wanted to pass them on to my daughter. Carol didn't understand this. She wanted entertainment, friends, an easy life. In high school, she started having behavioral problems. She skipped classes, hung out with boys I didn't like, and once they even brought her home drunk. Every scandal ended in tears and promises to mend her ways. But a week later, it all started again. "She's just trying to find herself," Frank would say in her defense. "It's normal at her age." "Normal is when a teenager is finding herself in her studies or hobbies," I replied. "Not in the company of questionable types." After high school, Carol went to college, but dropped out after a year and a half. She said she wanted to work. That college was a waste of time. I was against it, but Frank supported her decision. He said that not everyone needs a higher education. The main thing is to find your own path. Carol searched for her path for a long time. She changed jobs like gloves, saleswoman in a store, waitress, secretary in a small firm. She never stayed anywhere for more than a year. There were always reasons: a bad boss, an inconvenient schedule, low pay. At 26, she married Thomas, and I hoped that would settle her down. It didn't. Thomas turned out to be just as irresponsible as she was. He worked odd jobs and spent his money on motorcycles and fishing. Carol wasn't looking for stability either. They lived for the moment, without thinking about the future. They didn't have children. Either they didn't want any or it didn't work out. Carol never really explained. The marriage lasted 20 years, and all those years I watched my daughter turn into an infantile woman who waited for someone else to solve her problems. When she and Thomas divorced, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was that she decided to move in with me instead of trying to cope on her own. It's temporary, Mom, she said at the time. I just need time to get back on my feet. 3 years. For 3 years, she lived in my house, ate my food, spent my money, and thought I owed her. I owed her support. I had to put up with her laziness. I had to turn a blind eye to her shortcomings. And now I have to die so I don't get in the way of her happiness with her new man. At 7 in the morning, Jennifer came into the room with breakfast. She looked fresher than she had the night before. She must have had time to rest between shifts. Good morning, Mrs. Stone. How did you sleep? Fine, I replied. Thank you for your concern. You're being discharged today. Your daughter already called and said she'll be here around 10. I see. I ate breakfast, even though the food seemed tasteless. I needed to save my strength for what awaited me. After breakfast, Dr. Miller came in, examined me, and asked a few questions about how I was feeling. He was pleased with the results. Everything is fine, Mrs. Stone. You can go home. Just be careful. At your age, falls can be very dangerous. I'll be careful, doctor. And if you experience severe pain, don't endure it. Take your usual painkiller or see a doctor. I will. After the doctor left, I was alone. My neighbor had already been discharged early in the morning, and no new patients had been brought in yet. The ward was completely silent, and I could calmly think about what to do next. There were few options. I could try to convince Carol to give up her plans, but that was unrealistic. She had already made her decision, and it was unlikely that I could change her mind. I could run away from home, but where to? I had no friends who would take me in, nor did I have the money to live in a motel for a long time. There was only one option left, to go to the authorities. But who would believe that a daughter wanted to kill her own mother? Especially if that daughter pretended to be a caring relative and the mother was a paranoid old woman who made up stories. No, I need proof, and I have it. A recording of Carol's conversation with the doctor and Richard. But it's not enough to just hand the recording over to the police. I need a plan that's guaranteed to work. I remembered Barbara Cohen. We worked together in court many years ago, when I was still young. Barbara was an assistant district attorney, and I was a secretary in the department. We became friends and stayed in touch even after I quit. Barbara made a career for herself, becoming a district attorney and then a judge. She retired 5 years ago, but she still had connections in law enforcement. If anyone could help me, it was Barbara. She knew how the system worked and knew the right people, and she would believe me. We had known each other too long for her to think I was crazy. The problem was how to reach her. I knew Barbara's phone number by heart. It's amazing how memory retains important things. But calling her from the hospital was risky, and at home it would be even riskier. Carol would surely be watching my every move. I had to act quickly and discreetly. I had a few hours after discharge before Carol would start implementing her plan. That should be enough time to contact Barbara and arrange a meeting. Carol appeared at 9:30. She looked cheerful and even happy, which contrasted with the grim plans she had discussed the night before. She was carrying the same sports bag with my things. "Mom, are you ready to go home?" she asked, leaning down to kiss me. "Ready," I replied calmly. "Great, I've already signed you out. We can go." She helped me get dressed and gather my things. She acted like a caring daughter, and if I didn't know the truth, I would have believed in her sincerity. But now every gesture, every word seemed theatrical and false to me. "There's a surprise waiting for you at home," Carol said as we left the hospital. "What kind of surprise?" "You'll see. Richard has prepared something special." Special. Probably a stronger dose of the drug that would send me into my final sleep. I nodded and smiled, continuing to play the role of the unsuspecting mother. Carol's car was in the parking lot. It was an old Honda she had bought on credit a year ago. I got into the passenger seat and fastened my seat belt. The drive home would take about 20 minutes, enough time to think through the details of the plan. It's so good that you didn't get seriously hurt, Carol said as she pulled out of the parking lot. At your age, falls can be very dangerous. Yes, I was lucky, I agreed. Will you be more careful at home? Of course. And think about our conversations about the nursing home? I will. Carol smiled and turned on the radio. Light music played, and the familiar streets of San Jose floated by outside the window. It was a normal morning on a normal day, if you didn't know that behind this visible normality lay a plan for murder. But I had a plan too, and unlike Carol, I wasn't going to make a mistake. At home, everything was as usual. The same smell of air freshener that Carol overused, the same magazines on the coffee table, the same light dust on the shelves that she forgot to wipe off. Only now, this house where I had lived my whole life seemed like a trap to me, a place where my death was supposed to happen. Sit down in the chair, Mom. Relax, Carol said, helping me take off my jacket. I'll make some tea. Thank you. I settled into my favorite chair by the window. From here I could see the garden where I had grown roses and chrysanthemums for so many years. The autumn flowers were still blooming, although the leaves on the trees had already turned yellow. Life went on as usual, unaware of the drama unfolding in the house. Carol bustled about in the kitchen, clattering dishes and humming something. She acted as if she was happy to have me home. My daughter is a wonderful actress. It's just a shame that she directed her acting talent not toward the stage, but toward deceiving her own mother. Where's Richard? I asked when she brought tea. He left for work early this morning. He said he'd stop by in the evening to make sure you had a good trip. In the evening. So I have time until evening. I need to use it as effectively as possible. Mom, maybe you should lie down and sleep, Carol suggested. The hospital is tiring. You'll rest better at home. No, I'm not tired. I'd rather sit here. As you wish. I'll go do the laundry. I've got a lot piled up. Carol went to the utility room where the washing machine was. The sound of water and the motor drowned out other noises in the house. It was time to act. I took out my phone and found Barbara Cohen's number. We hadn't spoken in 6 months, but I was sure she remembered me. I dialed the number and held the phone to my ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Hello? A familiar voice, slightly aged but still energetic. Barbara, it's Gladys Stone. Gladys, what a surprise. How are you, dear? Not very well, Barbara. I need your help. What's wrong? You sound alarmed. I glanced around quickly. The washing machine was still running. Carol was busy. Barbara, this is very serious. I can't talk for long, but I need to meet with you. Today. Gladys, you're scaring me. What's going on? My daughter is planning to kill me. Pause. Long pause. Gladys, are you sure about what you're saying? Absolutely sure. I have a recording of her conversation. Barbara, I know how this sounds, but I'm not crazy. I'm really in danger. Another pause. Barbara seemed to be thinking about the situation. Finally, she spoke. Okay, where do you want to meet? Anywhere but here, and as soon as possible. In the park on Almaden. Remember the bench by the fountain where we used to have lunch? I remember. I'll be there in an hour. Gladys, if you're really in danger, maybe you should call the police right away. No, not now. First, I need to talk to you. Explain the situation. Okay, be careful. I will. I turned off the phone and put it in my pocket. The noise of the washing machine stopped, and I could hear Carol's footsteps coming from the utility room. I had to act naturally, not arouse suspicion. Mom, is everything okay? Carol asked, returning to the living room. Yes, everything's fine. I was just sitting here thinking. About what? About our conversation yesterday. About the nursing home. Carol perked up, her eyes sparkling with interest. And what did you decide? I don't know yet. I need more information. Maybe we should go to Sunny Hills and see it for ourselves. Great idea. We can go tomorrow or the day after. Tomorrow or the day after. If her plan works, I won't be alive tomorrow. Today, I'd like to take a walk in the park, I said, to get some fresh air after the hospital. Carol frowned. Mom, you fell just yesterday. Maybe it's too early for walks? The doctor said exercise is good for me, and the paths in the park are flat and safe. I'll go with you. No need. You're tired. Take care of your own business. I'm not going far, just to the park on Almaden. I won't let you go alone. Carol, I'm not disabled. I can walk to the park and back. Mom, be reasonable. In your condition. What condition? I interrupted. I feel fine. Carol paused, thinking about the situation. Apparently, she decided not to insist too much. It might seem suspicious. All right, she said finally, but not for long. And take your phone so I can reach you. Of course. I got up and went to get dressed. My fall jacket was hanging in the hall, with a wallet containing a small amount of cash in the pocket. That should be enough for a taxi if I need one. Mom, Carol called as I was putting on my boots. Yes? Be careful, please. There was genuine concern in her voice, and for a moment I thought she really cared about me. But then I remembered our conversation at the hospital that night, and the illusion vanished. Carol wasn't worried about my safety. She was worried about me getting into trouble that might interfere with her plans. I will, I promised. It took me 15 minutes to walk to the park. I walked slowly, stopping at shop windows and watching passers-by. I had to make sure no one was following me. Carol could very well have followed me to find out where I was going and who I was meeting. But the streets were normal and no one paid any attention to me. An elderly woman out for a walk. What's suspicious about that? Almaden Park was one of my favorite places in the city. It was large and green, with a pond and a fountain, old oak trees, and well-tended flower beds. I often came here with Frank when he was still alive. We walked along the paths, fed the ducks, sat on benches, and planned for the future. The bench by the fountain was free. I sat down and waited. It was cool, but the sun was warm, and the walk didn't seem difficult. Children were playing around the fountain, their mothers sitting on nearby benches and chatting. A typical scene on an autumn day in a city park. Barbara appeared exactly an hour later. I recognized her from afar. The same confident gait, the same straight posture. Time, of course, had changed her. Her hair was completely gray, her face was covered with wrinkles, and her figure had become fuller. But her eyes remained the same. Sharp, attentive, accustomed to seeing what was hidden from others. Gladys, she said, sitting down next to me. You look pretty good for someone who's facing death. For now, I replied, but I don't know how long that will last. Tell me everything, and take your time. We have plenty of it. I told her everything, from my fall in the basement to the nighttime conversation in the hospital. Barbara listened silently, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she sat silently for a while, thinking about what she had heard. Do you have that recording? She finally asked. Yes. I took out my phone and played the file. Carol's voice was clear and distinct. Increase the dosage. She needs to sleep for a long time. Then there was a conversation with Richard, a discussion of plans, a mention of an accident. Barbara listened intently. When the recording ended, she nodded. Convincing, she said. Very convincing. Do you believe me? I do. And you know why? Because you've never been prone to dramatization. If this were a figment of a sick imagination, you would have told it very differently. What should I do? For starters, protect yourself. Don't go home today. Where should I go? To my place. I have a big house with plenty of rooms. You can spend the night at my place, and tomorrow we'll decide what to do next. What about Carol? She'll be looking for me. Let her look. In the meantime, we'll contact the police. We have the recording, which is enough to open a case. Carol will say I made it all up. That I have memory problems. That I'm paranoid. Maybe. But the recording speaks for itself. And I know people in the prosecutor's office who will take the case seriously. Barbara took out her phone and dialed a number. Detective Graham, this is Barbara Cohen. I have a situation here that might interest you. Yes, serious. Attempted murder. No, not yet committed, but planned. Okay, I'll wait. She hung up and turned to me. Detective Graham is a good cop. He worked with me on several cases when I was a prosecutor. He'll be here in half an hour. Here? Yes, it's better to talk to him right away, while you're still safe and can explain everything calmly. We sat in silence, waiting. I thought about what was happening at home right now. Carol was probably worried. I had been gone for over an hour. Maybe she had called my phone. I checked, 3 missed calls. I decided not to answer them yet. Gladys, Barbara said, I have to warn you. Even if the police take the case, there's no guarantee that Carol will be arrested right away. Planning a murder is a serious charge, but substantial evidence is needed for an arrest. What about the recording? The recording is good, but a lawyer could find ways to challenge it. They could say it was edited or that the conversation had a different meaning. So Carol will remain free? Possibly, at least for a while. What am I supposed to do? Hide for the rest of my life? Not necessarily. There are other ways. What are they? Barbara paused, as if weighing her words. We can get her to confess. Record a conversation in which she directly admits her intentions. How? You go back home and act normal. Carol will try to carry out her plan, but you'll be ready. You'll record everything that happens. That's dangerous. Yes, but if we do it right, we'll have irrefutable evidence. I thought about Barbara's suggestion. It's risky, but it may be the only way to end this situation once and for all. What if something goes wrong? The police will be nearby. Detective Graham will organize surveillance. At the first sign of danger, they will intervene. Detective Graham turned out to be a man in his 50s with intelligent gray eyes and calm manners. He listened to my story, listened to the recording, and asked a few questions. This is a serious situation, he finally said. But Judge Cohen is right. We need more compelling evidence for an arrest. What do you suggest? An undercover operation. You go back home and act normal. We'll install equipment in the house and monitor developments. If your daughter really tries to kill you, we'll catch her red-handed. What if she gets there first? She won't. We'll have a team ready. I looked at Barbara. She nodded. This is the best option, Gladys. Trust my experience. Okay, I said. I agree. I returned home 3 hours later. During that time, Detective Graham had managed to organize technical support for the operation. My bag now contained a miniature transmitter disguised as a hearing aid, which I had supposedly bought at a pharmacy. In reality, it was a recording device with an audio transmission function. A police car was parked 2 blocks from the house, ready to respond to the first alarm. Carol greeted me with obvious relief mixed with irritation. Mom, where have you been? I called you 10 times. I was about to go look for you. I'm sorry, dear. I was walking in the park. Then I stopped by the pharmacy. My phone was on silent mode, so I didn't hear it. 3 hours? At the pharmacy? Not just at the pharmacy. I ran into an old friend, Mary Wilson, remember her? We chatted and time flew by. Carol calmed down but continued to study me intently. How are you feeling? Did the walk tire you out? On the contrary, I feel better. Fresh air is good for you. What did you buy at the pharmacy? I showed her a small box with a real hearing aid that Detective Graham had given me in case I had any questions. The doctor at the hospital said I should have my hearing checked. I decided to try this device. It's good that you're taking care of your health, Carol approved, although there was something strained in her voice. I went into the living room and sat down in my chair. I had to act natural, not arouse suspicion. At the same time, it was important to create conditions under which Carol would decide to take action. Carol, I've been thinking about our conversations, I said when she brought me tea, about the nursing home, about your future with Richard. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's really time for me to think about moving. Carol's eyes sparkled, but she tried to hide her joy. Mom, I'm so glad you're starting to understand. It will be better for all of us. But I need time to get used to the idea, to prepare. Of course, of course. How much time do you need? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe a month. Carol's expression changed. She had clearly hoped for a quicker decision. Mom, can't we, well, move a little faster? Richard really wants us to get married before Christmas. Before Christmas. So I had less than a month to live according to her plans. Why the rush? He has vacation time at the end of December. We wanted to spend our honeymoon in Hawaii, where the weather is beautiful in winter. I understand, but the house needs to be prepared for sale. Things need to be sorted out. Mom, I can take care of that. Don't worry about the practicalities. Of course she would take care of it. After my death, all my property would pass to her as the sole heir. Very convenient. Okay, I said wearily. We'll see how things go. Towards evening, I began to complain of a headache and general malaise. I said I felt worse than in the morning, that perhaps it was too early to go for such a long walk. Carol immediately perked up and offered to help. Maybe you should take something for your head? I have some regular pills. How about something stronger? Richard has prescription painkillers in his car. He sometimes suffers from migraines. Richard. He was supposed to come in the evening, and I suspected he would bring with him the very drugs that were supposed to send me to my final sleep. Let's see if the regular pills help. But the pills didn't help, of course. I continued to complain of pain, clutching my head, asking Carol to dim the lights. I behaved like someone who was really feeling unwell. Mom, should we call a doctor? Carol suggested, but without much enthusiasm. No need. I'm just tired. I'll go to bed early and tomorrow will be better. Okay, but if it gets worse, be sure to tell me. Richard arrived at 7 in the evening. He looked tense and was holding a small pharmacy bag in his hands. He greeted me, asked how I was feeling, and expressed sympathy for my headache. Carol said you weren't feeling well, Mrs. Stone. Is there anything I can do to help? Thanks, Richard, but I don't think so. I'm just overtired. I have a very good remedy for headaches, he said, opening his bag. It's prescription, prescribed by a doctor for migraines. Very effective. What is it? A modern drug, fast-acting and gentle. One pill and in half an hour, you'll feel much better. He showed me a bottle of pills. I wasn't familiar with the name of the drug, but Detective Graham had warned me that they might use powerful drugs disguised as ordinary painkillers. I don't know, I said uncertainly. I'm allergic to some medications. It's a very safe drug, Richard insisted. I've been taking it myself for 2 years with no side effects. Mom, try it, Carol added. You're in pain. What if it makes it worse? It won't, Richard assured me. On the contrary, you'll be able to sleep normally, and a good night's sleep is the best medicine. Good sleep, eternal sleep, if their plans were to be believed. All right, I finally said. I'll try it. Richard took 2 pills out of the bottle, white, small, unremarkable. Carol brought a glass of water. They both looked at me expectantly. Why 2? I asked. For better effect, Richard explained. A double dose is recommended for severe pain. A double dose? To be sure. I took the pills, brought them to my mouth, pretended to swallow them, and washed them down with water. In reality, the pills remained behind my cheek. I had mastered this trick as a child when I didn't want to take nasty medicine. Thank you, I said. I hope it helps. It will definitely help, Richard smiled. In about 20 minutes, you'll feel relief. Carol and Richard stayed in the living room, and I went up to my bedroom, supposedly to lie down and wait for the medicine to take effect. In reality, I needed to get rid of the pills and prepare for the next stage. In the bathroom, I spat out the pills and flushed them down the toilet. Then I carefully examined my bedroom. Detective Graham had installed a microphone here, but I didn't know exactly where it was. I had to behave in such a way that all sounds were clearly recorded. Half an hour later, I heard quiet voices coming from the living room. Carol and Richard were whispering about something. I strained my ears, but couldn't make out the words. I decided to go downstairs and see what was going on. Carol? I called weakly from the stairs. Yes, Mom? I feel sick. I don't think these pills are right for me. I slowly made my way down to the living room, holding onto the railing. Carol and Richard were sitting on the sofa with a brochure between them. What's wrong? Carol asked, standing up. My head is spinning and I feel nauseous. Could it be an allergic reaction? No, Mom, it's normal, Carol reassured me. The medicine is working. You'll feel better soon. What if I don't? Should we call an ambulance? No need, Richard said quickly. It will pass. Just go to bed and you'll feel fine in the morning. I'm afraid to fall asleep. What if I get worse? Mom, don't worry, Carol said, putting her arm around my shoulders. We're here. If anything happens, we'll call the doctor right away. If anything happens. They were counting on something happening. Okay, I whispered. I'll go to bed. But if I feel sick, I'll call you. Of course, Mom. We're not going anywhere. I went up to my bedroom and lay down on the bed without undressing. Muffled voices came from the living room through the open door. From time to time, I moaned so they would hear that I was still alive. An hour passed. The voices in the living room grew louder. Carol and Richard were probably starting to worry about why I was still showing signs of life. I heard someone coming up the stairs. Mom? Carol called softly. I didn't answer, pretending to be asleep. Mom! Louder. Again, silence on my part. Carol entered the bedroom and approached the bed. She leaned over me, listening to my breathing. I was breathing very slowly and shallowly, imitating a state of deep sleep or unconsciousness. Mom? She called again, this time loudly. I didn't respond. Carol shook my shoulder, but I remained motionless. Richard! She shouted. Come here. A minute later, Richard appeared in the bedroom. They both stood next to the bed and looked at me. She's not responding, Carol whispered. Check her pulse. Carol put her fingers on my neck. I slowed my heartbeat as much as I could. Very weak, she reported, and her breathing is barely noticeable. Excellent, Richard said with relief. The drug is working as it should. How long will it take? According to the instructions with this dosage, an hour or two, maybe less at her age. What if she wakes up? She won't wake up. The dose is calculated with a margin. They talked about me as if I were an object, a problem to be solved. No doubts, no regrets, just cold calculation. What do we do next? Carol asked. We'll wait another hour to make sure it's over. Then we'll call an ambulance. We'll say we found her in the morning, probably a heart attack in her sleep. What about the pills? They've already dissolved in her system. They won't find them. And I'll throw the bottle away on the way home. Richard, are you sure this will work? Absolutely. At her age, sudden death is common. The doctors won't even order an autopsy. They stood by the bed for a while longer, then left the bedroom. I heard them go downstairs, turn on the TV, and open a bottle of wine. They were celebrating their impending inheritance, and I lay there in the dark and waited. I waited for them to come back to check on my death and thus give themselves away. 2 hours passed. During that time, Carol came up to check on me 3 more times. Each time, I lay motionless, barely breathing, and she returned downstairs with increasing confidence that the plan had succeeded. The last time, she even held a mirror to my lips to check my breathing. I held my breath for a few seconds, and the mirror remained clear. "It's done," she whispered to Richard when she thought I couldn't hear her. "It's over." Downstairs, they discussed the details of the upcoming performance. Carol was supposed to wake up in the morning, go up to my bedroom, and discover my body. Then there would be hysteria, a call to the ambulance, conversations with doctors about my weak heart, and the stress I had experienced after the fall. It was a perfect plan that ruled out any suspicion. Richard left around 11 in the evening. He kissed Carol goodbye and wished her luck in tomorrow's performance. He said he would wait for her call in the morning and come right away to support her in her time of need. A caring fiancé who shares his bride's grief, Carol was left alone. She came up to me again, made sure I showed no signs of life, and went to her room. I heard her take a shower, brush her teeth, and get ready for bed. The usual evening rituals of a woman who had just killed her own mother. I lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house. The floorboards creaked, the wood crackled, a faucet dripped somewhere. The sounds of my home, where I had lived my whole life and where I was supposed to die tonight. But I was alive, and my killers had no idea. At midnight, I heard footsteps on the street. Cautious, muffled footsteps of several people. Detective Graham had kept his promise. The police were on standby. They were waiting for a signal, and now that signal had been received. The recording equipment had captured all of Carol and Richard's conversations, all their confessions and plans. The front door was opened very quietly, apparently with a lockpick. The police entered the house and stood frozen in the hallway, waiting for Detective Graham's command. I knew they were there, but Carol heard nothing in her bedroom. She slept the peaceful sleep of a murderer, confident of her impunity. Footsteps on the stairs. Detective Graham was coming up to check on me. I quietly got out of bed and went to the door. It was dark in the hallway, but I could make out the silhouette of a man. "Mrs. Stone?" he whispered. "Here." I replied just as quietly. "Everything's fine." "Good. Are you ready?" "Ready." The detective went downstairs and signaled to his men. A few seconds later, the lights came on in the house, and a loud voice shouted, "Police! Everyone stay where you are." There was a commotion in Carol's bedroom. She had been awakened by the noise and was trying to figure out what was going on. I heard her jump out of bed and quickly pull on her robe. "What's going on?" she shouted. "Who's there?" "Mrs. Carol Harrison. Come out with your hands up." "What's going on? Why are you in my house?" But she was already coming out of the bedroom, confused and frightened. 2 uniformed police officers met her in the hallway. Detective Graham stood at the foot of the stairs, holding an arrest warrant in his hand. "Carol Harrison, you are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder," he said in an official tone. Carol froze. For a moment, she just stood there staring at the police officers, not understanding what was happening. "Attempted murder?" she finally repeated. "Are you crazy? Who did I try to kill?" "Your mother, Gladys Stone." "My mother? But she... Carol turned toward my bedroom and saw me standing in the doorway. Alive. Well, looking at her without any sympathy. "Mom," she whispered. "But you..." "I'm alive, Carol, as you can see." "But how? Richard gave you..." She stopped, realizing she had given herself away. Detective Graham nodded to one of the officers, who took out a pair of handcuffs. "No." Carol cried. This is some kind of mistake. I didn't do anything. We have a recording of your conversations, Detective Graham said calmly, where you discuss a plan to kill your mother. And we have evidence that you gave her powerful drugs with the intent to kill her. That's not true. Richard just gave her painkillers for her headache. Painkillers that, in that dosage, could kill someone her age. Carol glanced between me and the police. There was panic in her eyes, but also anger. Anger that the plan had failed, that I had been smarter than she thought. Mom, she said, her voice breaking with tears. How could you? How could you deceive your own daughter? Deceive you? I asked in surprise. You tried to kill me, and I deceived you? I wanted what was best for all of us. You agreed to consider a nursing home yourself. Considering a nursing home and dying from a drug overdose are two different things, Carol. Mom, please, she pleaded, reaching out to me. Tell them it's a misunderstanding, that you misunderstood me. I looked at my daughter, disheveled, wearing a robe over her nightgown, with smudged mascara and pleading eyes. 48 years ago, I held her in my arms, fed her, taught her to walk and talk. I dreamed of what she would become when she grew up. I never thought she would become my killer. I understand you correctly, Carol, I said quietly. You wanted me to die, so you could get the house and marry Richard. No, that's not true. But the police officer was already putting handcuffs on her. Carol tried to break free, but they held her tight. Mrs. Harrison, Detective Graham said, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. I don't understand, Carol shouted. My mother is alive. No one was killed. What attempted murder are you talking about? The one you planned and tried to carry out, replied the detective. The fact that it failed does not change the nature of the charge. But I'm not guilty. It's all Richard's fault. He brought the pills. He said they were safe. Now she was trying to shift the blame onto her accomplice, a classic tactic of a caught criminal. Mr. Richard Walters has also been arrested, Detective Graham informed her. Our colleagues detained him about half an hour ago. Carol realized it was all over. Richard had obviously confessed to everything in order to get a lighter sentence. Now she had no choice but to tell the truth, too. Mom, she sobbed, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It just turned out that way. You did mean to, Carol, I said, and not for the first time. You've been waiting for me to die for a long time, and now you've decided to hasten it. That's not true. It is, and I'm sorry I realized it so late. The police led Carol to the stairs. She walked slowly, looking back at me the whole time. Mom, don't let them take me away. I'm your daughter, your only daughter. You were my daughter, I replied, until you decided to become my killer. Mom! Carol's scream echoed throughout the house, but I didn't flinch. 48 years of motherhood ended tonight. The woman being led away by the police was no longer my daughter. Detective Graham stayed with me after Carol was taken away. How are you feeling, Mrs. Stone? He asked. Tired, I replied. Very tired. That's understandable. You showed great courage. I was just defending my life. Not everyone could have acted so calmly to fake their own death. I had no choice. The detective nodded and put away the notebook in which he had been writing down my statement. You'll need to come to the station tomorrow morning to give your official statement, he said. But for now, get some rest. The danger has passed. After the police left, I was alone in the house. For the first time in 3 years, I was completely alone. The silence was complete. There was no one around, just me and the walls of the house that had almost been the place of my death. I walked through the rooms, turning on the lights, checking that everything was in order. Carol's things were scattered around the bedroom. She had left in a hurry. In the kitchen were the unwashed glasses from which they had drunk wine, celebrating my impending death. In the living room, on the coffee table, lay the brochure I had seen between Carol and Richard that evening. I picked it up and read the title, Sunny Hills, a nursing home with full care. On the cover, smiling elderly people were playing cards at a round table. I put the brochure down and sat down in my chair. Outside the window, it was the middle of the night, and the street was empty and quiet. Tomorrow, a new life would begin. A life without the daughter who wanted to kill me. It was scary and lonely, but honest. For the first time in many years, I was truly free.